Alright, this video is going to cover Chapter 6, Objective 5, which is all about fractures and how the bone is repaired if a fracture does occur. And so by definition, a fracture is simply a broken bone. And hopefully you haven't experienced one of those in your lifetime, but I'm sure there's definitely a chance that you may have, whether it be a small break or a big break. It's pretty common for people to break a bone here or there. And so there are different types of fractures, and they're going to be classified by their complexity, where they occur, and then some other features. So we're going to take a look at the different types of fractures. So transverse, okay, we've actually seen this word before. Remember that transverse means to go across, and so this is where when you have a long bone, it literally goes straight across the long axis, or it goes perpendicular to the direction of the bone. And so over here is an example of a transverse fracture. It's going straight across that bone there. And we've also seen this word before. Oblique means at an angle. And so this is at an angle any other than 90 degrees. So a 90 degree would be a transverse. And so oblique is going to occur across at an angle. And so there's an oblique fracture. Now, a spiral fracture is when your bones essentially get twisted. And so just imagine if somebody were to grab your forearm and just twist in opposite directions, that's going to cause those bone segments to kind of pull apart and spiral like you see here. All right, and then you have comminuted, and this is where you have a whole bunch of breaks and literally the bone just kind of shatters. And so you have a break, but then you have all these little pieces that are kind of still there. And so that's more of like a shattering of your bone. Now, an impacted, this is where, think about if you were to jump off a really high like building or something, and when your legs hit the ground, it would just kind of cause that impact. And so your bone is kind of driven into another bone, and it can kind of cause it to buckle. It's usually caused from compression. And so you can see that impacted fracture there. A lot of times you could get those maybe if you fell. And then a green stick is where it doesn't go all the way through from one side to the other of the bone. It actually just kind of breaks on one side, and the other side just kind of bends. So there's my green stick fracture. You can see it's only going part way through the bone. And then these particular terms, open and closed or compound and simple, can be used with the other types of fractures. So if it's open, that means it actually breaks through the skin, and this is where the bone can be found literally kind of popping out of the skin. And then closed is where it's staying within the body, within the skin. So we call that a closed or a simple, or we call it an open or a compound, depending on whether or not it breaks the skin. So once again, these can kind of be used with the other types of fractures. All right, now one of the things that bone is really good at is repairing itself. And so in fact, if you were to fracture a bone, whether you go to the doctor or not, that bone is going to heal itself. It has a very rich blood supply, and it has all those bone cells that can regenerate. And so what will happen though is if you do not get it reset in anatomical position, the bone will be deformed. So it will fix itself. And if you've ever seen someone that's maybe broken their nose and they didn't get their nose reset, they may have a bump up around their nasal bone. And then, so what they're going to do, if you do go to the doctor, they're going to have to reduce the bone, which is essentially get it back into the proper position. Now, if it doesn't require surgery, we call this a closed reduction. If it does require surgery, we call this an open reduction. And so it really just depends on the fracture and how complicated it is. Some can be very severe, and with severe fractures come some other complications. So if you fractured a really big bone like the femur, it could release fat, and then fat will go into the bloodstream, and it can actually block capillary beds, which could affect the oxygen exchange. And then we have open fractures. Remember, if they break the skin, anytime there's a break in the skin, it could lead to a possible infection. Bacteria could get in there and infect the surrounding tissues. All right, so the bone repair, it kind of goes along with the development of bone. So the first thing that's going to happen when a bone breaks is there's going to be bleeding. Okay, any blood vessel is going to bleed into the area, so it just depends on where it is. Remember, there's blood vessels in the periosteum, there's blood vessels that run through the osteons, there's going to be blood vessels in the medullary cavity. And so the first thing that's going to happen is the blood that is coming out of those vessels is going to begin to clot. And we call that a fracture hematoma. It just kind of looks like a big swelling of blood around that broken bone. And so what's going to happen is when the blood is no longer flowing in those areas, it is going to cause those bone cells to die. And so within about 48 hours, so a couple of days later, the chondrocytes that are found in that endosteum, which was that inner lining of the medullary cavity, it's going to create what's called an internal callus. And it's going to secrete this matrix. And then there's going to be other chondrocytes, the periosteal, on the outside of the bone. They're going to create an external callus. So essentially this is just going to kind of stabilize. So you have some cartilage cells and then some bone cells kind of stabilizing the bone from within and from the outside. Now, the healing does take time, so over the next several weeks, what's going to happen is those osteoclasts, those bone breakers, are going to go in and they're going to resorb that dead bone that is in that fracture area. It's going to stimulate the osteogenic cells, those precursors to bone cells. They're going to become active, they're going to divide, and they're going to become osteoblasts, those new bone cells that are going to create the bone matrix. And then the cartilage is going to be replaced. So calli is just plural for callus. And so the cartilage is going to be replaced by trabecular bone. And then eventually that trabecular bone is going to be replaced by compact bone where it needs to be on the outer margins. And at that point, the healing is going to be complete, but it can take quite a while. And so there you have your basic steps. So you have a hematoma, you have an internal callus and an external callus, and then they're going to unite. Compact bone is going to replace spongy bone, and over time you will have a healed bone. All right, so match the following fractures with its description. All right, open is when it breaks the skin. All right, so that's going to be D. The comminuted is when the bone just kind of shatters and breaks up into a lot of smaller pieces. It's going to be E. Impacted is when you have compression and the bones kind of drive into each other. The spiral is due to a twisting action or a rotation force. And then transverse is when it goes across, perpendicular to the bone. Which of the following events happens first after a bone is broken? And the very first thing that happens is you're going to have bleeding, and that's going to lead to a hematoma. All right. That's the end of this video. See you in the next one.